Now, you both in the past have written other books around real estate and around money, and now you all have combined forces like Voltron, and you all have co-written a book about first-time home buying. What made you all decide to go this route with the new book?
I am a licensed real estate agent, and I answer the same questions all the time. And I can't help every single person on the planet buy a house. I would be too busy, but I wanted everybody to know what I know about the process. Of course, every single real estate deal is going to be different, but there are things that every real estate deal has in common. And when you are a first-time home buyer, you don't know what you don't know. And we wanted you to have a strong foundation to make a smart decision. Like you said in the intro, this is the biggest purchase you're going to make. You're spending hundreds of thousands of dollars. You should spend them intelligently.
Yeah, and I think that I'm a big personal finance nerd, and the first home purchase is the biggest financial decision that most people make in their lives, right? Up to that point. And it has such an enormous impact on how your life, your financial profile, all of those different freedom, a lot of freedoms that can accrue to you over time happen. And so I think that there's a big strategy component that you need to think about, like the home is not an investment. The home is an expense. The less you buy, the better, the wealthier you'll become long term, whether you buy or rent. And then knowing that there's a rent versus buy decision, knowing the ins and outs of the transaction process, the strategies, what you're going to do when you leave your home. Most people live in there for 7 years on average, right? And so what's going to happen when you exit the home? That's something you have to think through when you buy it. If you don't, you're going to be left with only bad options at exit instead of a couple of several good options with that.
So let's deal with the here and now, Mindy. The market in a lot of cities is super high. It's expensive. People are getting offers tens and thousands, sometimes $100,000 over and above what they had it listed for in some markets. If I'm a first-time home buyer, how do I evaluate the current situation to see if this is a market I should step into, or is this a market that I should sit out and wait?
That's a really good question. The first thing you should look at is what monthly payment can you afford and do you want to make? And then you want to talk to a lender and see if that's something that's going to be realistically something you're going to be able to afford and be approved for. And then you want to talk to a real estate agent and see if there's anything in that price range. Let's say that you want to make a $1,000 a month mortgage payment. Okay, that's going to be, I'm just making up numbers. That's going to be a $300,000 mortgage. Great. The lender says you can get approved for a $300,000 mortgage, but you live in LA. So you go to the agent and he's like, $300,000 doesn't buy you anything in LA. So then that's not a number that's not a market you want to step into. You want to be comfortable with your decision. You want to be financially intelligent with your decision. And right now, this market is really, really crazy. It may not make a lot of sense for you to jump into this market right now, but until you know what's going on in the market, you can't really make that decision. So start looking around, go to open houses and see, wow, this is a really great house, $750,000. Okay, I'm going to need to stop looking in this neighborhood. Or, hey, that's something that I can afford and I'm comfortable with the payment for. I can continue to look. I see that what I'm after actually exists.
Scott, you had kind of touched on some earlier when you were talking about the rent versus buy dilemma. For some people, they're taught that renting is a waste of money. And as soon as you can, you should become a homeowner. Is that accurate? Number one, based on your research, based on your journey, based on people you've spoken with, and how do we navigate that thought, that mentality? Am I wasting money by sitting here renting?
Yeah. So when you buy a property, you're going to pay for let's say you buy a $300,000 property. You're going to pay between 1% and 3% of the purchase price in what's called buyer closing costs. And these are things like a title insurance or an inspection, an appraisal, and a variety of other items that go along with purchasing a property like that. So let's say you buy a $300,000 house, that's going to be between $3,000 and $9,000 in buyer transaction costs. So you're down $3,000 to $9,000 immediately after buying your house, right? And yes, over time, you will recoup that in the form of appreciation. And if you have a mortgage, you're going to be paying down that mortgage. So over a long period of time, buying a home generally is advantageous to renting if you're going to stay in that property for a long period of time. But when you sell the property, you're also going to incur another set of transaction costs, the seller closing costs. And those can be in the ballpark of 7 to 8% of the property purchase price. So if I buy a $300,000 property and I turn around and sell it the next day, I'm out 30 grand in transaction costs. In order for buying to be better than renting, I have to own the property for long enough or experience enough appreciation or pay down the mortgage substantially enough through my regular mortgage payments to offset those closing costs. So is renting better than buying? It depends on your timeline. It depends on what you believe about appreciation, rent growth, and the way you construct your mortgage payment and versus rent and those types of things. In general, I have built a little calculator in Excel. We can give the link out for whatever that is, but depending on what you believe, it's somewhere between 5 and 7 years. If you're going to be in a property for more than 5 or 7 years, it can often be advantageous on average to buy versus rent, but it's going to depend on a whole host of factors like your market appreciation assumptions, all that kind of stuff, all things you can play with in that Excel spreadsheet.
Good. And we'll definitely put a link to that in the show notes. Now, either one of you all, let's stay right here on this topic because there are some couple of big names out there that I respect greatly. Grant Cardone and Ramit Sethi. They both say you should never buy a house. It's always going to be more advantageous to just rent forever. They got philosophies, they got research allegedly. What are your thoughts on the message that they're conveying?
I think if you're trying to get really really rich, really really quickly, that buying a home is they're probably right to a large extent with some of those things. But if that's not your goal, if you're not a big entrepreneur, I think there's a mathematical decision to be made about buying versus renting. And if you're going to stay put in one spot for a long time, you're probably going to do better off by buying than you are with renting. Now, I'll caveat that and say I agree with them at another level, which is I haven't bought my first property. I didn't buy a home like most people do, or most people think of that first home purchase. I bought a duplex, moved in, fixed up half, rented out the other half, lived in one half, got a roommate, all that kind of stuff, and did what was called a house hack. And Mindy did what's called a live-in flip, where she bought a house that needed a lot of work and fixed it up and flipped it and captured the profit. So if you're wanting to do something that is highly advantageous to your financial situation in advance of the normal strategies of buying versus renting, and just finding a place to live and choosing a strategy there, then there are much better alternatives to either just doing a normal home purchase or a normal renting situation. So how's that for the nuance behind answering Ramit and Grant Cardone's philosophy?